Hello, greetings. This is an informal video to talk about the fundamentals of Tantric Yoga. Now, we now have almost 4,000 people in the group, hundreds of people who are very active in posting and responding and commenting, and many more who are just quietly lurking and reading the posts, which is great. Obviously, if everyone was engaged, it would just be an avalanche. And I think the level of engagement we have now is wonderful. And that many people who are in the group have been following the free course on the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, this 9th century text in Tantric Yoga. And that's great. And the text itself does presuppose some knowledge of the fundamentals of Tantric Yoga, So this scripture, the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, or VBT for short, was originally an initiatory scripture, meaning to say it was expected that you had undergone some kind of formal initiation and some kind of probationary period before you would have access to the teachings of this text. So some people ask me, oh, are you then betraying the tradition or not following traditional guidelines by sharing the teachings of this text? And the answer is yes and no. This particular scripture, the VBT, is already out there in the public sphere in multiple translations, none of which are quite accurate. One or two are pretty good, but none of the translations manage to nail every verse. But the point is that the scripture is already out there. So it's perfectly legitimate and acceptable to teach publicly on a scripture that is no longer secret. And that's why, there's this course on that particular scripture, and I won't be doing public courses on other scriptures that are still not yet in the public sphere. So that's what makes sense to me in terms of respecting the guidelines that the tradition itself offers. So I thought we could, we just have been doing this scriptural study week by week. And as we go along, you'll see we'll come to some Tantric Yoga fundamental practices, right? Because let's remember, the VBT is originally in the 9th century was very innovative. It was a very innovative text that was innovating new practices, but also presenting some of the classical practices that most people at that time already knew, but that many of you guys don't know. So I thought it would be okay if we come to those fundamental practices as we went along in the text, which are not presented up front in the text, probably because, again, the author of the text assumed that you already knew them. So now I feel that since the kind of average level of experience in the group is more in the beginner phase than I had previously realized, because many of you are so well read, you're so intelligent, you make such thoughtful comments, and that doesn't necessarily, of course, correspond to years of practice experience, right? And so I think even if you are very knowledgeable, even if you have read a lot about, even if you've, memorized Tantra Illuminated and other books, the fundamental practices have a lot to offer. In fact, the tradition itself says, if you think you're beyond the basic practices, that they're too beginnery for you, then that's a red flag. that it's a delusion to think that we are ever beyond the fundamental or basic practices, because the fundamental practices are fundamental precisely because they can go deeper and deeper and deeper indefinitely. They're designed in that way so that even though they're relatively simple, they can yield ever greater depth. And so the advanced practitioner, by definition, is one who is still doing the basic practices, but also has now, through experience, become qualified for subtler practices. And the interesting thing about the more advanced practices is that they're not more complicated necessarily. I mean, sometimes they are, But often they're still simple practices. It's just that they're so subtle that they're advanced because a beginner might think, "Oh, I got this. I understand this practice," when in fact it's way too subtle to understand without years of foundational groundwork in which one becomes really intimately experientially aware of the difference between a kind of conceptualization of experience and direct experience that is not mediated by your mental, emotional, social, and cultural conditioning. So anyway, that's just a little brief overview. And I just want to mention some of these fundamental practices. So one is uchara. Uchara is the raising of a bija mantra through the central channel of the energy body. And we'll talk more about that practice another time. The practice of Deha Shuddhi, that means the purification or recalibration of the fundamental elemental energies. So earth, water, fire, wind, space, and there are subtler dimensions to those energies, right? That I won't discuss now. I just want to give you a quick gloss of which of those practices I mentioned before are kind of fundamental to classical tantric yoga as it was practiced 1,000 years ago all the way up to today. So purification and recalibration of the 5 elemental lights or elemental energies. That's Deha Shuddhi. Antaryaga, well, that is a complex subject. That Antaryaga essentially is an inner yogic practice of visualizing and worshiping the entire retinue of one's initiatory deity. So those of you who are initiates in Tibetan Buddhism are already familiar with this practice under another name, probably. I believe Antaryaga is specifically a Shaiva term. These practices get presented under different names, you know. So if you remember Tantra Illuminated, if you remember the diagram in the middle of the book, in the Trika section, that shows the practitioner seated in meditation, visualizing a trident with 3 prongs, where the central channel is the staff of the trident. And the 3 prongs have 3 goddesses, and they're actually these 3 goddesses that you see right here. So in this particular version of Antaryaga, you visualize this trident made of light energy, and you visualize the 3 goddesses on the 3 prongs of the trident above your head, much as you're seeing right here. But it's much more complex than that. It involves the full visualization of the mandala of the initiatory deity, and it's a practice where you learn how to stay incredibly focused and keep a lot in awareness simultaneously, and then you do a mantric activation of each element of the deity's mandala and each element of the deity's yaga or retinue. So that's, you know, what we can call an advanced practice, and it's one of those that actually is quite complicated until you get the hang of it. Okay, so now the practice I want to share with you now, it's a foundational practice that the VBT does teach, but I just felt intuitively we should just talk about it now, and we'll come to it also in the VBT videos. So that's the practice of Deha Shuddhi, one of the most fundamental practices, okay? So the theory behind Deha Shuddhi is essentially that in order to experience ourselves as we really are, in order to experience the body as an instantiation of divine consciousness, not only the body, but actually all the layers of selfhood, right? So reference Tantra Illuminated, the 5 layered self, the section on nested layers of consciousness, or the 5-layered self, right? The layers of selfhood being going from more peripheral to more essential, the body, the energy body, which includes the mind or psyche, the prana or life force energy, the inner void, and then awareness or consciousness itself, which pervades all the other layers. So those are the 5 aspects of our selfhood: body, psyche / energy body, life force, void, and awareness. Okay, so the goal of practice really is to experience all these layers of selfhood or embodiment as manifestations of the one, as manifestations of divine consciousness, as the energy, the pure energy of the universe itself, which is conscious, which is consciousness. Okay, so when you put it into words, it just, to me, to my mind anyway, it sounds trivial. It sounds, I mean, all these words are really kind of placeholders for something that can't be defined in words, right? But anyway, there's a vague pointer that we're seeking in this practice to experience all the layers of embodied consciousness as manifestations of the one, whereby they're how to describe this? The one infinite divine consciousness, which gives rise to, sustains, and dissolves this whole universe moment to moment, is expressed and instantiated as all these layers of embodiment, which are each just different frequencies of vibration of that one fundamental infinite consciousness presence, right? So what we're calling, therefore, void, prana, energy body, physical body, these are simply different frequencies of vibration of fundamentally the same power or energy, which also vibrates as everything whatsoever. Okay, so this teaching, somebody asked in the chat window, Stephanie asked about, is this similar to the koshas? Yes. Yes, in fact, the popularization of the Vedantic model of the koshas was originally an attempt to compete with and with this tantric model. That's a historical thing I don't want to get into now. But this is the tantric model of the koshas, but we don't use the term koshas because sheath implies a transcendentalist view that these are kind of coverings of what's ultimate. Whereas here in this tantric view, this non-transcendentalist view, each of these layers of selfhood are direct expressions of the absolute or of the one divine consciousness in form, not sheaths concealing it, if you see the significant difference there. And the model is a little bit different. There are five koshas and as well, but in the kosha system, but they're actually a little bit different. Some of them are the same, some are different. Anyway, I wrote a blog post on this comparing the tantric system to the Vedantic system, which is popular in modern yoga, and which is yeah, I'll stop there. Okay, let's get into the specific practice of Deha Shuddhi. So this practice involves, it's a non-conceptual method for incinerating one's body images and socially constructed self-images. By non-conceptual, I simply mean that it's not a kind of mental process of thinking through one's self-images and deconstructing them using the mind. That too has value. That too has a place. You know, this kind of deconstruction, a deconstructionalist mental practice that we see exemplified in postmodern philosophy, but often in a very confusing and unclear way in postmodern philosophy. Whereas this is a practice of simply intending the incineration of one's body image and self-images through a practice where you're not actually thinking about what those self-images are. Okay, so it's simple, or we'll do the simple version of the practice, and even the the more nuanced version is really not much different. It is a relatively simple practice. So in this practice, you visualize, imagine, or feel, whichever verb works for you, right? It's all the same in Sanskrit. Visualize, imagine, or feel this incandescent white hot fire rising through the body as you feel but don't think about it, this fire incinerating all your self images, your socially constructed sense of self, and your body image. And then there's more stages to the practice. Let's just do it. Let me get my bell. Okay. So sitting up nice and straight, relaxing the body, taking a couple of deep breaths. Now feel or imagine a little white flame blossoming from the tips of both big toes inside the body. This is all internal. So this white flame inside both big toes is now spreading and spreading, rising through the feet, the ankles, the calves. You imagine it rising as you hear the Deha Shuddhi mantra. Imagine or feel that this fire is burning away your body image, your self images, your ideas about yourself. Feel or imagine the fire rising slowly as you hear the following mantras. Om Sah Sabahyantaram Tanum Dahayami Phat. Om Sah Sabahyantaram Tanum Dahayami Phat. Now the fire is rising higher and higher, enveloping and wreathing the whole body in incandescent white hot flames, burning away your limited sense of self. Om Sa Sabahyantaram Tanum Dahayami Phat. And with that final mantric syllable, the fire reaches to the crown of the head and beyond, your whole body enwreathed and enveloped and filled with this beautiful incandescent white fire. Offering into that fire all self-images and body image and letting it all burn away. And then the fire dies down, leaving behind only pure transparency in the shape of a body. Pure openness, pure transparency in the shape of a body. Spacious presence. And then you notice that there is a thin layer of ash on the ground. And this ash represents the samskaras, or subtle impressions, subconscious impressions of your self-images and body image. So the next step is we invoke the wind mantra to blow away these ashes, to blow away even the subtle impressions of our self-images. Imagine that ash being blown away by a beautiful, strong wind. Om Saim Tanu Basma Utpuyini Karomi Hu. Nothing but pure transparency and open spaciousness. Now imagine a cascade of beautiful, brilliant white light pouring down from just above the crown of your head, filling this open space and creating a body of light, a body of radiant, sparkling white light. And within this body of light, there are subtle radiances of different colors. We call them bindus and chakras, and lines of energy called nadis. So feel now, if you can, a body of radiant white light with subtle tracery, meridians or nadis within it, and complexifications of light called chakras arrayed along the central channel. You don't need to enumerate them, just have a feeling that they're there. Beautiful body of light. Ham Murtaye Namaha. And then feel this body of light thicken into form as your physical body. That the physical body is simply the expression in matter of the body of light. And slowly turning the hands, palms upward on the thighs or knees, dropping the chin towards the chest. Let the eyes float open and take in the vision of your own body as a manifestation of the body of light. As the energy of pure consciousness in palpable form. And taking the hands to Anjali Mudra, bowing inward to your own sacred heart, which is the heart of all beings. Om. Okay, so the Deha Shuddhi that we did is basically exactly as it's done in classical Tantric Yoga, just that there's the option of adding a mudra called Mahamudra. It's one of many mudras that goes by the name Mahamudra. There's many Mahamudras, right? And this particular Mahamudra is simply tracking the rise of the fire through the body with the hands. It's totally optional, but your hands start over your respective feet, assuming you're cross-legged. Only if you're cross-legged. Your hands are crossed too, so that the hands are over the respective feet, and then the hands are rising. Maybe I need to back this up. Right? So the hands are tracking the rise of the fire through the body like this, and then coming up alongside the head, all the way up to here. And that's the final Pat mantra that you hear. That's when the hands get there. So whether you're doing the mantra 1 time or 3 times, the final Pat should be when the hands get here. For some reason, the computer's image is slightly askew. I don't know why that is. Anyway, I'll put the mantra in the chat window so you can practice it yourself. But you need to not be opening your eyes to look at words. You know, you have to memorize the mantra. There's no other way to do it, because otherwise you're too much in your mind space. The mantra needs to become a pure vibration of energy that matches the fire and the mudra, which is optional. So that's the Deha Shuddhi. That's the complete Deha Shuddhi. Now, the body of light, the Prakashakaya, or body of light, also known as the Amrita Vyapti, or nectar pervasion, that's more complex, because when you're doing the full practice, you are visualizing the complete body of light with 3 bindus, with 7 chakras, or however many chakras you're working with in your chakra system, 5 chakras, 7 chakras, whatever it is. And with at least the primary nadis. So until you're very, very intimately familiar with the energy body, that's way too mental to be trying to visualize that. So you need to have a kind of felt sense of the energy body developed through intimacy with these various centers, in order to kind of assemble it intuitively without having to track, you know. So you shouldn't be having to think, oh yes, okay, this chakra is there and it has this many petals or whatever. In fact, we don't even visualize the chakras in that way in this particular practice, but just as kind of nexuses of light, where a bunch of different nadis or channels meet. And they do need to be visualized in specific locations, but not with specific numbers of petals and bija mantras and stuff like that. That's a mantra nyasa practice, whereas this is the body of light practice. Again, prakashakaya, or amrita vyapti, meaning nectar pervasion, the experience of the nectar pouring down and filling in the transparency, creating the body of light. Okay, so that's a daily practice. That's a daily practice in classical tantric yoga, and there's the simple version of it, you know, can be done in 5 minutes, right? And I do encourage you to explore it intuitively. Now, some would say, no, this is tantric practice. It has to be done in all the details exactly right. And yes, there's a place for that. but actually it's better if you explore it intuitively, just using the instructions I've given in this video and the mantras I'm about to put in the chat window. And then later you can develop it more precisely, right? Because the body of light is real. So you can explore it intuitively. This is, of course, assuming you have some version of Shaktipat or awakened Kundalini, and then you'll have an intuitive sense of the energy body that you can explore in this practice. So very simply then, in summary, it's burning away body image and socially constructed self, Deha Shuddhi. That's an upward moving practice, right? Pure transparency, blowing away the ashes that represent the samskaras of self-images, and then even more palpably present, pure, spacious transparency, and then filling in that transparency with the nectar pervasion, which creates the body of light. That's the basic practice. Okay, so maybe one of our artists can depict it visually, but the more important that it's a felt sense. It doesn't need to be so much visual. It's more of a felt sense. Okay, so let's see if there's any questions. I'm late for an appointment, but let's see if there's any questions in the chat window. Okay, so I'll just paste in the mantras here. So the first is the Deha Shuddhi mantra, right? That's for the mantra that goes with the incandescent white hot fire rising through the body, optionally with Mahamudra, right? Om Sa Sabahyantaram Tanum Dahayami Pat. Right? If that is just, if language is not your thing and that's too much of a tongue twister, then you could just do Om Sa Pat 3 times, where all 3 pats are loud and forceful, or just the last one, just the third one, as I did in the practice, you know. So pat is with the tip of the tongue on the roof of the mouth. That's super important. Pronunciation matters in this case, because the tip of the tongue on the roof of the mouth is also directing the energy upward. So it does matter. And so when you do a loud pat, you're not throwing it out in front of you. You're throwing it up. So it's pat. So it's a very shocking sound if you're not used to it, but it's an important part of the practice. So the abbreviated form would just be Om Sa Pat. Okay? And then for the blowing the ashes away, right? The ashes of the samskaras, we use the wind mantra that uses a kavacha bija, and that's in the chat window now. Om Saim Hanubasma Utpuyani Karomi Hum. Again, if language is not your thing, you're just going to drop out the words and go with the bijas, which is Om Saim Hum with a bell. Om Saim Hum. So bell goes with the wind mantra. That's important. Not that you can't do it without a bell, but in fact, if you can actually kind of summon the sound of a bell in your consciousness and sort of hear the bell, then you don't need a physical bell. Okay. Brian asks, I wonder is what logic to use when ordering one's daily practice? Ought they always to be in a certain order? Yeah, we're going to have to come to that in another video. Some things don't need to be in a certain order, but other things do. There's a natural sort of vinyasa flow to certain practices. Okay, so then what other mantra do you need? Oh yes, so there are, for building, if you're going to build the body of light in all its details with its bindus and chakras and so on, then there's a mantra for each element of that light body. Okay, but if you're just doing this general kind of intuitive version of the light body, then all you need is one mantra, which is Om Ham Murtaye Namaha. Right? And please be aware that H-A-M in Sanskrit is always pronounced hum, not ham, right? So the bija, the murti bija here is hum, Om Hum Murtaye Namaha. That's for the body of light, okay? And again, when we do the more advanced version, wherever that happens, then there's a bunch of mantras for all the elements of the body of light. Yes, this is a daily practice. I mean, it's not required. I mean, none of you are in a kind of, well, almost none of you are in a situation where a certain practice is compulsory every day, but traditionally this is a daily practice, okay? Deha Shuddhi followed by Amrita Vyapti Prakashakaya. So those words, I didn't type those words. Amrita Vyapti means nectar pervasion, which builds or creates or conjures the Prakasha Kaya, or body of light. Now, not probably, in terms of the more detailed version of these practices, they can't really be shared in a public forum or even a semi-public forum like this. The more detailed version of these practices will be given to those who make a more specific commitment to the path of Tantric Yoga, which involves a samaya, which we'll get to later. So there's certain, there's certain practices or more developed versions of certain practices that are only accessible in that context. So there has to be, in the tradition is very clear about this, there has to be sort of gradations of approach that are marked by level of commitment, and it's your commitment that qualifies you to receive the more detailed version of the practices or certain mantras. Okay, so that's it for today. And I wanted to, I just felt inspired to do this video, and we'll explore some of those other practices more in depth in other contexts. I want to continue developing this community and developing the notion of Kula as guru, meaning to say that it's the collective wisdom of the whole community that serves as the guru. And that's not to say, of course, there are some people who are more experienced than others, who are more knowledgeable than others, and honoring that experience and knowledge is important. And that can be done within a context that acknowledges that it's the collective wisdom of the whole community, which is the guru, rather than any one person. So that's the model which, in my deep contemplation, seems to me to be most viable for a 21st century version of this path. So we'll talk about that all later, and how that can manifest in terms of real physical community as well as this online community. So thank you all. And there are some questions I didn't get to, but that's okay. That's it for now. And lots of love to all of you. And may we all experience an ever deepening practice and realization, and ever tighter community and ability to honor each other and honor ourselves in this beautiful process of exploring what it is to be an embodied form of consciousness. Om.